This is WriterSpeak, devoted to the written word and those who create it. I'm Suzanne M, and I'm happy to bring you today Poetry, Politics, and Passion by Jennie Orvino. Jenny grew up and came of age during a vibrant time in our cultural history at the nexus of the civil rights movement, the feminism, the peace movement against the Vietnam War, the sexual revolution. And she writes about it very candidly and openly in this, her most recent publication. Welcome, Jenny.
Thank you.
You frame your book, you begin your book with a memoir portion, and I want to say that your work is very in the moment. You're writing from who you are today at this age, but it's almost like you're having a dialogue with the younger Jenny who was embarking on a life that was maybe new and filled with people and activists and artists. And talk a little bit about why you chose to open the book with a memoir.
I think I was seeing many parallels between the late 1960s and the present. And so that was one of the reasons. It was also just a fabulous time of my life. I was just about 22, just graduated from college, and I just felt right about everything. You know how young people do. You just think you know it all. And it was a time where I had been really importantly influenced, I think, by some of my teachers when I was in college. I went to an all-girls Catholic school, and so you would think that would be a very conservative environment. But I was part of kind of the radical wing of the Catholic Church that consisted of people like Father Dan Berrigan, Father Phil Berrigan, people who were pacifists in the tradition of Gandhi, and who believed in the social gospel that said love was primary, thou shalt not kill. And so examining what was going on in the world, part of the things that we did when I first came to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is where I went to go to graduate school, was asking the church to speak out against war and racism. And so the very first scene in my memoir takes place in a church in the cathedral in Milwaukee, where we had staged a demonstration where we were reading a statement to the congregation asking the church to speak out.
You reflect upon that in a way through your current sensibilities, but it does seem like there's something that was set in motion at that time. You said, I believe my purpose in life is to write poetry and work for peace. And it seems like that's something that you have stayed true to from those early days to today.
You know, when my personal coach asked me to come up with a mission statement, and this was about, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and I tried to come up with something, and I really couldn't come up with a statement better than what my 22-year-old self had written in my diary. I've expanded my writing a little bit, as the book is an indication, not limited to poetry, but trying to write personal essays and memoir. I mean, I would never attempt a novel, that is just too much, but writing prose instead of poetry. So I don't know if my mission is just to write poetry and to work for peace, but I'm interested in a change of consciousness, I think, and creating a change of consciousness within the creative core of each and every individual. Because I felt that as an artist, whether it's writing or dancing or painting or singing. I know a lot of musicians. I knew a lot of musicians then. There was something about the power, film, there's something about the power of art that I feel transforms unlike any lecture or, I don't know, polemical discussion. And so I felt that if I wanted to change consciousness, that art was the way to do it. And for me, you know, writing is the way to do it. And now if maybe it's writing emails or writing a blog or whatever way I can point things out to people or say, this is what I discovered. Maybe you might be interested in this as well.
And I think you were quite effective in the book of bringing that to me, at least, as the reader. I felt challenged, and also I was able to reflect upon my own life in a way. So I think you've been successful at once examining and exposing your own life, but also opening up that process to the reader as well. And I don't know if that was what you were trying to achieve as much as your own personal expression, but the candor in which you look at your own life and look at culture and politics around you is really astounding in a way, that you're unflinching at your looking at yourself, your doubts, as well as your achievements.
Well, I was inspired by the community of people that I participated with. I mean, and I think part of the memoir was to honor some of those people who meant a lot to me. For instance, my first boyfriend, Bob Gillum, was a conscientious objector who went to jail rather than, he tore his draft card into little pieces, and he spent 18 months in a federal prison because he refused induction. And so that was one person. Some of the others were the people who worked in the peace movement, the members of the Milwaukee 14, who were priests and lay people who broke into a selective service office, stole hundreds of draft files, put them on a public square in Milwaukee, poured homemade napalm on them and set them on fire, and stood around singing, arm in arm, waiting to be arrested. And this was their statement, nonviolent civil disobedience, to say, we want to prevent these young men at the time from going off to war and killing other young men. So those were the inspirations that I had. I can't really take a lot of credit. I mean, I was just an impressionable young person who became inspired by those she met.
When I was preparing to talk to you today, my notes said, "Make love, not war." And I think that that's something that also could be a mantra for you as well, that in your youth, being involved with these other activists and artists who inspired you, also sexual passion was awakened, or you were exploring that as well and had some interactions with people. You talk about your first boyfriend and indeed the father of your child, but you had some interesting experiences with the activist lawyer William Kunstler, and it seems like you have integrated in such a way the political, the artful, the passionate, as you call your book, and in explaining to readers how important that integration is to healthy living.
Someone once asked me, why do you write about sexuality? Well, number one, it's one of the main interests. Even though people pretend that they're not interested in sex, everybody is interested in sex, whether they're openly interested in it or not. Just like to say everybody masturbates mostly, but nobody wants to talk about it. My CD that I made, my spoken word CD, I titled it "Make Love, Not War." And some people have made fun of that, saying, well, that's an old 60s saying. I mean, that is my lifetime mantra, I think. And that's why I named my anti-war, in a sense, CD, but also it's an interesting mixture of political poetry and erotica. And I guess that is something that's going on within me. My two interests are consciousness raising in the area of politics and consciousness raising in the area of sexuality, because there was a time when I had to examine what's the difference between sexuality, pornography and erotica, okay? And for me, there was some kind of a respect and sensibility, even a feminine sensibility, that I did not find in pornography that I looked at. So I thought, well, I want to write. If it's not there for me to read, I'm going to try to write it myself.
I want to quote from your book here. What kind of revolution would take place if people trusted themselves and their partners to explore together in the most intimate of spaces? I once heard that good sex is the adult version of child's play, a satisfying activity full of curiosity and abandon. What if we supplemented that wisdom with the wisdom gained? If we asked more questions about where our shame comes from, we might get answers that allow us to fully relax. And I loved that that you're posing this question to us, that we're all pretty uptight, and maybe we would have a better world if we would be more open to exploring intimacy together.
When I think about participating in the project that I did, and we said we would talk about this, Orgasm, Faces of Ecstasy, which was a film that I participated in. I was one of 25 or 30 people who were asked if they would be willing to be filmed during sexual arousal, but only faces, no bodies shown. And when I think about images of pleasure in media, in films, versus images of graphic violence, dead bodies, bloody bodies, shooting, just horrendous mayhem and violence. And yet, if a breast gets exposed, if a woman is shown in orgasmic pleasure, this is like a big no-no. I mean, what if our children were as exposed to beautiful sexuality as they are exposed to horrendous violence? I mean, to me, it is totally backwards.
And I think you, in this quote, you bring up the whole thing of shame, and you do have an essay in the book about your own personal discovery of sexual pleasure and masturbation at a young age, as most children probably encounter their own bodies, but it's immediately associated with shame. And that defines us for the rest of our lives and the rest of our activities that often do lead to abuse, violence, and the like.
And I know I received an email after that film was screened from a young man who was in the Air Force, and he said he was made to feel so much shame for masturbating as a young person, and yet praised for how many kills he made. And he's just said he suffered from that contradiction. Not only did he suffer with the guilt about the sexuality, but he suffered from the contradiction of being praised for one and shamed for the other.
Well, I want to take us back a little bit to your coming of age in Milwaukee, and you dedicate the book to your parents, and yet in the memoir portion of your book, you're your parents, your father, really, they tried to understand you and what you were going through. And it seems like they tried to be supportive, but ultimately maybe couldn't. Or I'd like you to talk a little bit about, or fill in some of the spaces maybe with that, because you honor your parents quite a bit in the book, also in the poetry, and I know your parents were great dancers. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, I had a happy childhood. You know, I came from a close-knit Italian family. My parents were very affectionate to each other and to me, so my childhood was great. And my father, especially, I was really a daddy's girl, and he just thought I was terrific, and I thought he was terrific. When I went off to college, we started to have a little friction because he had been in the service, although he was in the medical corps, which I gave him credit for saving lives instead of killing people. And I mean, I remember, I have a poem about how my grandmother received his medals in the mail after he was wounded, a Silver Star and a Purple Heart, and she threw them across the room. And it was like, who cares about these medals? You know, I want my son whole. And he ended up getting blown up in a Jeep and lost the hearing in his right ear and the sight in his right eye. And that really affected me. And I sometimes wonder if my anti-war stance had its basis in the fact that my father was hurt. You know, I don't know.
Did he ever come to a point where he really got what you were doing as a young woman?
You know, he used to say, my country right or wrong. That was, when we would argue about Vietnam, that was kind of it. And I don't know if we ever agreed, but the thing that was so touching to me now, even when I think about it, is that my parents were so much more tolerant of me than I was of them. I just, you know, really, they loved me throughout everything, even though they were, as my father says, sorry to say, the end result has been very disappointing. You know, there were disappointments. But I think once I settled down and gave him a grandchild, I think things became a little bit better, and I wasn't so much of a militant activist. I mean, little did they know many of the things that I did, but outwardly, you know, I think they could see that I was living a more, quote, normal life. And I admired my parents very much, and I admired my father very much, and so that's why I dedicated. And my father taught me how to dance. I learned cha-cha from my father, and I think my lifelong love of partner dancing is a result of the wonderful dance relationship that I had with my father. That I used to stand on his feet, you know, with my socks. I'd be on his feet, and he would dance, you know, like that. And even when I was little. So much affection there, and I guess that's why my book is dedicated.
And you have a nice picture of your dad in the book, too, that you could really see the family resemblance. During this period of time in Milwaukee, you met a lot of interesting people and became friends with Robert Bly, poet Robert Bly, and he has said about your book, or about some of your work, the poems don't dance around the edge of town. They head straight for the center. And that's something I have found too, that you don't dance around. You say just what you mean, whether it is about reflecting upon your family or your own hurt or excitement. But tell us a little bit about your friendship with Robert Bly, how that came about, and how he's influenced you.
The first time I met Bly was when we were organizing a poetry reading against the war in Vietnam in Milwaukee. And Bly and several other poets, Gary Snyder, Robert Duncan, Muriel Rukeyser, Ed Sanders, luminaries of the time, were doing a nationwide tour and raising money for the group called Resist, which were adult supporters of draft resistors, war resistors. And they came to our town. I mean, I was on the defense committee for the Milwaukee 14, and I helped organize this poetry reading. And it was quite, Robert Creeley was there too. It was quite exciting. So I met Bly for the first time then, and we began a little correspondence. When he got involved in the Iron John period, where he was talking, an icon for the men's movement, and also the Great Mother Goddess movement, he was doing readings and tours where he would invite people to come and drum and dance while he read poetry. And so I had the opportunity to play my belly dance drum at one performance where Bly was reading poetry. So we did correspond over the years. We had a long gap, but he came to Berkeley, about 15 years ago, and I bravely went up to him as he was sitting in one of the audience chairs and spoke to him, and he remembered me, and he remembered the Milwaukee 14, and so we reconnected. And I was able to subsequently interview him for the radio for KRCB, and that was a wonderful reunion, a wonderful moment, because he's getting up in years now, and I felt like that reading that I saw him give, which was right at the beginning of the Iraq War, so it was like 2003 or so. He was again touring and asking, where is everybody? Where are all the poets? He said, one quote was, during the Vietnam War, we had poems coming out of our ears, and now where's all the protest? So, man, the guy still, at his age, was so inspiring, so alive, so vibrant, so committed. Plus, he has the spiritual side. Plus, he translates all the great Indian poets. He's always there at a Rumi celebration. So he has that great blend, which, I hope to cultivate too, that blend of the spiritual, sexual, and political. I mean, that's what the book is, Poetry, Politics, and Passion. That to me is like the ideal. If there was an ideal goddess, she would be the goddess of sexuality, spirituality, and poetry.
Right. Jenny, I'd love to hear you read from the book. Can you give us a poem today?
Let's start with this poem, which I will dedicate to the many musicians I have loved and who have loved me. It's called Improviser. I imagine walking into any place where you are playing music and ordering a designer martini. The bartender flirts with me and shakes it up. He shaves chocolate for garnish with the same slow care that I shave my legs, which I cross, then lean the least bit on one hip and swing my foot, flaunting each toenail painted with Berry, Berry, Broadway. I rise like a tune rises, dizzy with drink and softer than gardenia petals. A perfume you are certain of, mine, although your back is turned. In colors that make red seem tame, your chords work the room, ear to ear. And I contain the sound like a tiered fountain, each bowl filling, overflowing to the next, plunging to the deepest where the liquid holds, not spilling, trembling at the brim.
Thank you. Thank you. And that is a taste of some of your more, the passion part of the book. And you also have an essay that I just thought was fabulous. make me a match. And I think any single woman and some single men will relate to what you expressed in that story about just trying to find a partner.
That's right. This is, you know, my tribute to midlife dating, and I'll just read like two paragraphs.
Great.
High on my list of meet and greet mixers are those that include salsa lessons, theater dates in a group, or interest-focused events like Spirit Rock Meditation Center Single Sangha. Even if I don't get an invitation to go out for coffee afterwards, at least I've danced or seen a good play or found some inner peace for the evening. Various relationship workshops seemed to hold promise, especially one called I'm looking for Mr. Right, but I'll settle for Mr. Right away. Unfortunately, no matter what the workshop's title, or whether it takes place in a downtown hotel or a church social hall, 90% of the attendees are female. We're the majority in the world, we live longer, and men hate this kind of thing. I'm reminded of the old joke about a group of women enjoying brunch in their retirement community. After a new gentleman moved in, one of the ladies gossiped, "I heard he killed his wife." "Oh, good," said the others in unison. "He's single."
Thanks, Jenny, for reading from your book, Poetry, Politics, and Passion. Jenny's book is available from Amazon.com as an e-reader or as a paperback, and you can get Jenny's book through JennyOrvino.com. I'm Suzanne Lang. Thanks for joining us today on WriterSpeak.